Hello, this is the desk where I do most of my drawing and painting, and today I thought I might talk a little bit about how I make my books and how my drawing has changed over the years. So this is Clovett's Alligators, which is the first book that I wrote and illustrated, and you can see if you look closely that my lines are quite spidery and tentative. I wasn't a very confident drawer then. I was probably drawing with a mapping pen, which was a very stiff pen that was very hard to get any fluidity with. So I was really pretty much just doing the outlines and then colouring them in. You can see by the time I got to my farm, which was a couple of years later, that the line work has got a little bit more confident. Where can we see in here? And you can also see that I've started to do some shadows. See on the grey horse how there's a sort of a bluey grey line of watercolour that goes under the horse's belly and under its neck and under its chin, and the same on this horse in the background, and even underneath the dog and the horses there's a little bit of shadow. And when you look at the world around you, you tend not to see shadows, but if you don't put them in your pictures, everything looks a little bit like it's floating off into space. So I was pleased to discover that little trick all those years ago that made my drawings look a bit better. And then here in Magic Beach, you can see my drawings getting a little bit more confident again. And this confidence and the improvement in my drawing just came from doing more and more of it all the time. So that when I did The Very Noisy Baby a few years ago, as you get more confident with your drawing, then you can afford to be a bit more haphazard. So this is the scene where it says, "Then the Pony Club girls came searching for their horse who'd strayed from his field. When they heard a neigh from the little pink house, he must be there, they squealed." And I love these little girls because it reminds me of my daughter Claire and her friend Maggie, who used to go to Pony Club together. And they always looked like that. They were always filthy. They had mud all over their faces and they had chewy stuck in their hair and all that sort of stuff. But what I like about this drawing is I've drawn it with pencil and I've drawn it quite quickly on a rough piece of paper. And then I've photocopied it onto watercolour paper. So the pencil line is quite grainy. And then when I've put the colour on, I've kept inside the lines pretty much, but I haven't tried to be too careful. And I think that kind of rough, untidy look is much better than being too careful. One of the things that's hard to understand when you start drawing is that, or making any sort of art, is that often the mistakes are the best bit. And that if you're too careful, things can look a little bit dull. You can see their horse hiding up there in the bushes. You can also see, on this paper, the fact that the grain of the paper has made, see when you get really close, you can see how the colour looks a bit splotchy, and that's because the paper has a texture to it. Sorry, I'm holding this by hand, so it's a little bit rough. And some of the paints have different pigments, and as they settle on the paper, the pigments settle into those little dimples, so that's why you get that nice effect. And that's why it's more interesting to use rough watercolour paper than smooth colour paper. This is a page from Alison Lester's ABC, which began life as Alison Aldo, and then the publishers thought it would be better if everyone knew it was an ABC book. And this is interesting to look at because I've drawn this with a fine liner. And if you look closely, you'll realise that I've gone over nearly all those lines more than once. And I've tried to make the bottom lines as though where the light isn't coming from a little bit heavier than the top ones. So these oranges might be a good way of looking at it. So that also makes things look a little bit more solid and as though they're not floating off the page. This was a really interesting project to do. This is a book called Running with the Horses, and I did this book using Photoshop, and I wanted to do it for a long time, but I never got good enough at Photoshop to do it. And finally, my editor said, you know, you don't have to put it all together. You can just give the designer the layers and the designer will put it all together. So this cover picture, this was one set of illustrations, the black and whites. The sky was a photo. All the snowflakes were another layer. The mountains were another layer, and there was a layer of watercolour as well. So that was all put together digitally to make these illustrations. I think my favourite one in the book is this one where the little girl's horse just got stuck in the snow and she doesn't know if she's going to be able to survive. So that hill that she's on is a snowy hill in Japan, and that's where the sky comes from too. And then there's the charcoal drawing, and then there's the layer of snowflakes. And some of you are probably good enough to do this on your computers, but I don't think I ever will be. But it's a really nice way of combining photographs and actual drawing. And I loved using the black and white in this because it made it look a little bit more like almost like a comic book or a graphic novel, that the pictures faded along. Here you can see there's real grapevine leaves red around the stable door. Noni the Pony is kind of a little bit like this book, but with Noni the Pony, I actually put all the layers together myself. So, for instance, this picture here, the wallaby and Noni and Dave and the cat are all drawn and painted onto a watercolour paper that doesn't have a texture. And then I've painted the background and I've stuck them on just manually, like I've cut them out with a really fine blade and stuck them on with glue so they're sitting on top of it. And I like this effect because it allows me to have lots of detail on the figures, but the background has that lovely texture. And I've put that sparkle on the sea just by running a really white crayon over the rough watercolour paper, and that's picked up all the little dimples and made the sea look as though it's sparkling, I'm sorry. Here again you can see the bush sparkling as they're going out for a walk and the sea sparkling in the background. My dog Bigsy is a little bit like that as well. My dog Bigsy has a terrific story about starting it. I hadn't thought about doing a book about Bigsy, but one day my editor Amy was out here and she said, you know, you really should do a book about Bigsy. He's so funny, and Bigsy is a very funny dog. So I had this story in mind that Bigsy would be let out in the morning and go all around the farm barking at everyone. When I started to do the illustrations, I'd started making pictures of Bigsy, but I hadn't figured out how I was going to do it. And then one day, Amy rang up and she said, we really need a cover quickly. Can you give me something that I could use for a cover just for now? And I had this picture of Bigsy, and I wanted something green to put behind it in the scanner so the white and brown would look good against the green. And I had this piece of green fabric that my friend Elizabeth Honey had given me. She'd fished it out of a skip outside a furniture factory and brought it up to a place in Queensland near Innisfail at Darragee where we were making books, and we were going to use it to cover books, but I said to her, oh, can I have that to make a dress? It's so beautiful. Anyway, I brought it home and never made the dress, but I did stick it behind the picture of Bigsy. And once I did that, I thought, I'm going to use this green fabric all through the book. So the green fabric becomes the hill that Bigsy's chasing down. So in this too, Bigsy is also drawn and painted on watercolour paper. But this time, unlike Noni, when I've cut him out, I haven't let the outlines be there. The only outline is the shadow and the little tiny little drop shadow you see of the front object against the background. There the kangaroos are bouncing down the hill. So you can see there's lots and lots of ways of making books, and it's probably much more fun to be experimental than to just draw a picture and colour it in. I really love doing collage, and I love this green fabric. There's Patchy Pig. Yow, ow, yelp, help. Patchy Pig's not scared of Bigsy. Oink, oink, squeak, oink. She's really telling him off, and all her little piglets are coming behind too. Here's a picture out of Kissed by the Moon. And once again, you can see how I've used the shadow. You can see the little bit of blue shadow underneath the mother's hat here. And then there's a little bit down the sides and underneath them, and also here underneath the dogs, so that those objects don't look like they're just hanging in space. And I'm actually terrible at shadows. Like, often they're not in the right place, or if you thought it out, there would be actually 3 suns in the picture. But I think as long as you do something, it's better than doing nothing. And then I'll quickly, because I'm nearly up to my 10 minutes, this is a picture I've just done for Janie Godwin's Sing Me the Summer, which is a really lovely story about the seasons. And here you can see again how I've drawn shadows to make it all hang together. And especially of this mum sitting under the umbrella. It was quite hard to actually take the plunge and jump in and make her shadowed, but it looks much better. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. Bye-bye.